Alright, hello and welcome to the training. As you can see from the title, we're going to be covering today how to reset your dopamine so you can perform like a beast. So the overview is, we're going to talk more specifically about the overview itself, then understanding dopamine, the modern dopamine crisis, then the dopamine spike and crash cycle, also how deep work rebuilds your dopamine system, then designing an environment that supports high performance, then the review, and finally your action items for the next few days. Okay, so before we get started, if you want this training along with the document that goes with it, make sure to check the description and you can access that by joining the free community. If you want to work with me one-on-one, make sure to book a call from the link as well in the description. Okay, this training is really for people who are already working hard and building something. If you know you're capable of something more, another level of focus, consistency and performance, but haven't yet unlocked it and you're wondering how to get to that next level, then this is for you. So with that said, let's get started and talk about dopamine, understanding dopamine. Before we get into any strategies or frameworks, I want to really outline exactly what dopamine is, because there's often a mislabeling about what it actually is. So most people believe dopamine is the pleasure chemical. That's kind of true, but kind of misses the point as well. They think dopamine is the thing that makes activities feel good. That description sounds pretty simple, but it's not 100% accurate. Dopamine is not primarily responsible for pleasure. It's actually more like motivation. So it gives you that motivation feeling, wanting to pursue things. So it is a signal in your brain that determines whether something feels worth pursuing. Your brain is constantly evaluating the environment, asking a very simple question: is this worth my energy right now? When the answer appears to be yes, dopamine increases. When dopamine increases, motivation appears. So tasks feel easier to start when your dopamine is high. Effort feels meaningful. But when dopamine decreases, the opposite happens. Tasks feel heavier, more resistance, you don't really want to start. So even small activities begin to feel exhausting. So dopamine is not simply a chemical, it is a behavioral guidance system. It determines what your brain moves towards and what to avoid. So if you can figure out how to actually release dopamine towards the more meaningful tasks in your life, the things that you want to build, then you're onto something. You're onto a winner, okay? So that's the key, really. So once you understand that, the entire conversation around productivity starts to change, because productivity is not just about discipline, it's about how your motivation system is calibrated. The modern dopamine crisis, let me talk to you about this. You are probably very familiar about this, you know what I'm going to say. The next thing we need to understand is the human brains evolved in a completely environment than we currently are in, okay? And often, big tech companies, social media can manipulate our primal instincts, and that's exactly what we're doing. You know this by now, but let me just relay this very clearly. So for most of human history, rewards were slow, food required effort, skills required years of practice, social reputation developed gradually. Okay, your brain evolved to pursue long-term, meaningful rewards through sustained effort. But the modern world operates on a very different timeline. Like I said, digital environments are designed around extremely fast stimulation, instant gratification, so very little effort required. You get the dopamine hit straight away without that effort. Notifications, social media, short form videos, that's a massive one. Constant messages, notifications, every one of those produces a small dopamine spike, or sometimes a large dopamine spike. Individually, these spikes may seem harmless, but repeated hundreds of times throughout your day, which most people are when they pick up their phone, they see a notification, they see a message, they're on social media, they see short form, constant spikes throughout the day. This begins to train the brain in a bad way. The brain starts expecting constant stimulation. When stimulation slows down, dopamine drops. That drop creates boredom, restlessness, and difficulty focusing. And then your brain just craves the next hit to get it back up towards baseline again. So that's why many people experience something strange when they try to do deep, hard, meaningful work. It's not because the work itself is so hard, but because what you've exposed your brain to and what it's used to makes it feel hard. They sit down with the intention to concentrate, but after a few minutes they feel the urge to check something. They feel an urge to spike their dopamine system in some way. Okay, so they might go to a message, a notification, a new piece of content. They want to distract themselves. They want to get that dopamine hit. And they interpret that urge as lack of discipline, okay? You can often be hard on yourself. But what is actually happening is something neurological, okay? You're not being lazy. Your dopamine system has been trained to expect faster rewards. So deep work feels uncomfortable because the reward cycle is slower. That gratification becomes a longer period of time away. So the dopamine spike and crash cycle, let me tell you about this. So now there's another dynamic that makes this even more important to understand. Dopamine operates through contrast. When dopamine spikes high, it often drops below baseline afterward. This usually means every large spike is followed by a dip below baseline. If someone repeatedly consumes very stimulating activities throughout the day, their brain experiences repeated spikes but also repeated drops. Okay, and over time, on average, you're going to go below your baseline to where you started from. Okay, so which means ordinary activities start to feel less interesting over time. You're constantly craving newer and higher stimulation to get that same spike. Work tends to feel dull. Reading feels boring. Even conversations can feel less engaging. You're less present. You're less excited by them. Okay. And when people experience this drop in motivation, they often try to solve it the wrong way. So they look for even stronger stimulation, more scrolling, more content, and then you're kind of stuck in this cycle. More novelty as well. But stronger stimulation creates even larger spikes, which leads to even larger crashes. So you can see this cycle continuing. Eventually the brain becomes trapped in a pattern where only extremely stimulating activities feel interesting. This is what people often describe as feeling mentally fried, or another word for this is anhedonia. You know, you really have lack of pleasure in things that were previously pleasurable, okay? And that's basically because your dopamine system is being exposed to these fast-acting things and your baseline is dropping. So what a dopamine reset actually means. So when people talk about resetting their dopamine, what do they actually mean, and are they doing it the right way? Let's talk about that. It doesn't actually mean eliminating dopamine. That's the wrong way to do it, because dopamine is essential for motivation. Dopamine isn't inherently bad, okay? You need it in your life. You need it to feel motivated. So if you remove all dopamine, you're going to feel pretty flat. You're not going to be productive or make progress, okay? So without dopamine, you would not pursue goals, build skills, or accomplish anything meaningful. So this is important. A dopamine reset actually means recalibrating the reward system for the right stuff. Okay, so it means training the brain to associate dopamine with meaningful progress rather than constant stimulation. So it's more about the source and controlling your source of dopamine rather than removing it completely. Okay, this is where most people do it wrong. And this process happens through 3 phases. Reducing artificial stimulation is the first one, very important. Recalibrating reward expectations, and then aligning dopamine with productive, meaningful behaviors. So let's talk about them individually. Let's break them down. Phase 1, reducing stimulation. The first phase involves reducing high frequency dopamine spikes. This can often be the most uncomfortable to do because your brain is so used to it. This means limiting the activities that produce this constant stimulation. Examples include endless scrolling, constant notifications, short form content consumption, and compulsive checking behaviors. The goal is not necessarily eliminating technology entirely. The goal is reducing stimulation long enough for the brain to recalibrate. And when the brain stops receiving constant spikes, the baseline begins to stabilize. At first, this can feel uncomfortable. Many people experience restlessness, boredom, or feeling flat during this phase. This can be the most difficult phase. But this discomfort is actually a good sign that the reward system is adjusting, okay? You then give it a chance to then test it with different sources of dopamine after gone through this phase. So the brain begins recalibrating its expectations. So this is when slower activities begin to regain their appeal. Activities like reading, exercise, learning, building projects, practicing skills begin producing more noticeable motivation signals. You might actually start to find these activities rewarding, enjoyable, the process. At first, the reward may feel subtle, but over time, the brain begins associating these activities with progress. And progress itself becomes rewarding. This is an important shift because the brain starts recognizing effort as meaningful rather than frustrating. Okay, you're starting to link effort with a productive dopamine release, and that's the true relationship that you're pursuing. So phase 3 is performance alignment. The final phase occurs when dopamine becomes aligned with your productive, meaningful behavior. This stage, deep work becomes easier to sustain. You're starting to actually enjoy it, get into kind of flow state mode, lose track of time, actually just enjoy the process. That's the goal. So focus stabilizes, the urge for constant stimulation decreases, your cravings are going to be less and less, and you're going to get that dopamine from different sources, and you're going to get it more slowly, and it's usually going to come from effort. So you're going to start linking effort with this slow dopamine release. Okay? And you'll find you'll actually feel better. This is a more productive and more stable. You don't have the crashes because of the effort. Okay, and you're actually going to make progress in your life. So this is where high performers operate most of the time. The motivation system has been trained to reward meaningful progress rather than constant novelty, which means they do not rely on discipline alone. Their brain actively supports their goals. So the deep work effect, one of the most powerful ways to rebuild your dopamine system is through deep work. When attention remains focused on a single activity for an extended period of time, something interesting happens neurologically. Dopamine begins increasing gradually, slowly, and instead of large spikes followed by crashes, the brain experiences a stable increase in motivation. This is why people often report entering flow states during deep work. Effort begins to feel natural, time passes quickly, and attention remains stable. These states train the brain to associate sustained focus with reward. And this strengthens the motivation system over time. When you get used to that cycle, that hard work, that slow dopamine release, and that reward, you're going to start to actually crave the hard, meaningful work, which is amazing. That's the goal. Okay? So how can we design a dopamine friendly environment? How can we set ourselves up for success to access the flow state and calibrate the right reward system? So this is the final piece of the puzzle. It involves environmental design, extremely important. Motivation is heavily influenced by what rewards are available in your surroundings. The brain naturally pursues the easiest available source of dopamine. So if your phone is sitting there, your social media is open, your brain's gonna just want to go down the path of least resistance, okay? But if it's not an option, maybe you just have an empty room and maybe you just have a laptop open, maybe the only option is your deep work, the work that you know you need to do. Therefore, your brain's gonna be like, oh, I can get a bit of dopamine from that, let me do that, okay? So that's why this is so important. So high performers solve this problem intentionally. They design environments that reduce competing rewards, they silence unnecessary notifications, they put their phone out of the room, they create spaces dedicated to focused work. They separate communication time from creative work. These changes may seem small, but they can stack up and dramatically influence how the brain allocates attention. Okay? Review. So let's review what we covered in this training. First, we talked about the misconception around dopamine and why dopamine is not the pleasure chemical, but rather the motivational signal in the brain. Then we talked about the modern dopamine crisis and how digital environments train the brain to expect constant novelty, constant stimulation. And then we discussed the dopamine spike and crash cycle, which you are familiar with, and how repeated stimulation lowers the baseline motivation, keeps you feeling flat throughout the day, and keeps you in that cycle. After that, we explained what a dopamine reset actually means and how it involves recalibrating the reward system. Then we broke down the 3 phases of resetting dopamine, which was reducing stimulation, recalibrating the reward, and aligning your dopamine with meaningful progress. Then we discussed how deep work strengthens the brain's motivation system. And finally, we talked about designing environments that support your focus. Okay, so here's the action steps from this video you can actually apply today, tomorrow, and learn something from this, okay? So if you've made it this far, let's attack this and actually do some action. Here we go. So the next few days. First, reduce high frequency stimulation for the next 1 to 2 weeks. Limit social media, short form content, and constant notifications. Second, introduce activities that produce gradual progress, such as exercise, reading, learning, or building something meaningful. Third, schedule daily deep work blocks where your focus is a single. Third, schedule daily deep work blocks where you focus on a single important task without interruptions. And fourth, design your environment so that meaningful work becomes the most accessible reward available. If you follow these steps consistently, your dopamine system will begin recalibrating. When that happens, motivation begins to feel natural again. Okay? With that being said, I hope you enjoyed this training and got some good value out of it. If you did, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and comment below. Let me know what you want to see next. If you want the course document that goes along with this training, make sure to join the free community in the description. Thank you for being here, and I will see you on the next one.